cowboy alien saw a human, pick up a shotgun and realize they were in trouble. The moment Marcus Kane saw Tom Harrison reach for the double-barreled shotgun hanging above the fireplace, time seemed to slow to the crawl of honey in winter. It wasn't the casual reach of a man checking his weapon after reports of wolves or rustlers. This was the deliberate, measured movement of someone who knew exactly what kind of threat he was facing and had finally decided to do something about it. Marcus had been sitting at Tom's kitchen table for the better part of an hour, sharing coffee and discussing the upcoming cattle drive with the same easy familiarity they had maintained for 3 years of neighborly friendship. But now, as Tom's weathered fingers closed around the stock of that shotgun, Marcus caught something in the older man's pale gray eyes that made his enhanced alien senses scream warnings that no amount of human disguise could silence. Tom Harrison knew. The realization hit Marcus like a physical blow, sending shockwaves through nervous system that had been modified over decades to perfectly mimic human physiology. After 27 years of careful integration into frontier society, 27 years of flawlessly maintaining his cover as just another drifting cowboy who had settled down to ranch life in the Montana Territory, his secret had been discovered by the one human he had come to trust more than any other. Tom's voice, when he finally spoke, carried none of the warmth that had characterized their conversation just moments earlier. "Marcus Kane," he said, pronouncing each syllable with the precision of a man who had been practicing this moment in his mind. "That is what you call yourself, isn't it? Though I'm guessing that's not the name you were born with. Hell, I'm guessing you weren't born at all. Not the way normal folks understand being born." The coffee cup in Marcus's hand began to crack under the involuntary pressure of his grip, hairline fractures spreading through the ceramic, as his carefully controlled human facade struggled to maintain itself under the stress of exposure. His pale blue eyes, which had fooled every human he had ever encountered, now felt like beacon lights that might reveal the depths of intelligence and experience that no human lifetime could contain. Tom continued talking as he broke open the shotgun to check its loads, his movements economical and practiced in the way of men who had spent decades dealing with dangerous situations. "Took me a while to figure it out, I'll give you that. You're good at this game, real good, but you made mistakes, small ones that most folks wouldn't notice. Thing is, I ain't most folks." Marcus remained perfectly still, every survival instinct honed over centuries of existence telling him to calculate distances, assess escape routes, and prepare for the kind of confrontation he had spent decades trying to avoid. But beneath the cold logic of self-preservation, he felt something that his species rarely experienced, genuine regret that his deception had poisoned what had become the most meaningful relationship of his long life. The irony was not lost on him that Tom Harrison, a simple cattle rancher with no formal education beyond what frontier life had provided, had succeeded in detecting what trained government agents, military officers, and scientists had never suspected. But then, Tom possessed something that official investigators lacked, the intuitive understanding that came from years of friendship, daily interaction, and the kind of trust that made small inconsistencies stand out like shadows at noon. Tom finished loading the shotgun and let it rest across his knees, not quite pointing it at Marcus, but making the threat unmistakably clear. "You want to know what gave you away?" he asked, settling into his chair with the patient manner of a man who had been planning this confrontation for some time. "It was little things that wouldn't mean much by themselves but started adding up once I began paying attention." He enumerated Marcus's tells with the methodical thoroughness of a detective presenting evidence to a jury. The way Marcus never seemed to get truly tired, even after the hardest days of ranch work. The fact that he never got sick, not even during the influenza outbreak that had laid up half the territory. His uncanny ability to predict weather patterns, locate water sources, and handle animals with an intuitive understanding that went beyond normal human experience. "But what really clinched it," Tom continued, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face, "was watching you during that lightning storm last month. You stood out in it for near an hour, just letting it hit you, and when you came back inside, you looked refreshed, like you'd been drinking from some kind of well that the rest of us can't even see." Marcus closed his eyes and allowed himself a moment of what his people would have considered dangerous emotional indulgence, genuine sorrow at the loss of something precious. Tom Harrison had been more than just a neighbor and business partner. He had been the closest thing to family that Marcus had experienced during his long exile from his own people. Their friendship had provided him with insights into human nature that decades of careful observation could never have yielded. When Marcus opened his eyes and met Tom's steady gaze, He made a decision that violated every protocol of deep cover operations. "You're right," he said simply, his voice carrying harmonics that human vocal cords were not designed to produce. "My real name is, well, you couldn't pronounce it with human speech. I've been Marcus Kane for so long that it feels more real than what I was called before." Tom's grip on the shotgun tightened slightly, but his expression showed more curiosity than fear. "Before what? Before you came here? Before you decided to play human? Just what the hell are you, Marcus?" The question opened floodgates that Marcus had kept sealed for decades. In halting, careful phrases, he began to explain concepts that human language barely contained, that he was a member of a species that had been studying Earth for millennia, that his people existed throughout the galaxy as observers and guardians of developing civilizations, that his assignment to the American frontier had been intended as a routine monitoring mission that had evolved into something far more personal. He told Tom about his home world, circling a star whose light had never touched human eyes, about technologies that could traverse the distances between galaxies as easily as a horse covered the miles between towns. He spoke of his people's ancient mission to study and protect younger species, to ensure that the development of consciousness and civilization proceeded without interference from malevolent forces that prowled the darkness between stars. But most importantly, he tried to explain how his assignment to study human society had transformed him in ways that his superiors had never anticipated. Living among humans, experiencing their hopes and fears, their capacity for both cruelty and kindness, had awakened aspects of his own nature that his species' advanced evolution had long since left behind. Tom listened to this impossible revelation with the same patient attention he gave to weather forecasts or cattle market reports, occasionally asking practical questions that revealed a mind trying to fit extraordinary information into familiar frameworks. When Marcus finished his explanation, Tom sat silent for several minutes, processing implications that would have shattered the worldview of most humans. Finally, Tom set the shotgun aside and leaned forward with the intensity of a man who had reached a crucial decision. "So you're telling me that you're some kind of guardian angel from the stars, sent here to keep an eye on us primitive humans and make sure we don't get ourselves into trouble we can't handle?" Marcus winced at the oversimplification but nodded. "Something like that, though the reality is more complex. We don't interfere directly unless there's a threat that a developing species can't address on their own. Mostly we just watch and learn and try to understand." Tom's response surprised Marcus with its pragmatic acceptance of the impossible. "Well, hell, Marcus, or whatever your real name is, that doesn't sound so different from what good neighbors do for each other anyway. You've been helping me with my ranch, I've been helping you with yours, and we've both been keeping an eye out for trouble. The only difference is that your neighborhood happens to be a lot bigger than I thought." This reaction was so far from what Marcus had expected that he found himself struggling to process it. In his experience, humans who discovered the truth about alien presence on Earth typically responded with fear, anger, or attempts to exploit the situation for personal gain. Tom's matter-of-fact acceptance of the revelation was unlike anything in Marcus's extensive files on human psychological patterns. But Tom wasn't finished. "The way I see it," he continued, "you could have done a lot of things over the years that would have made life easier for yourself at my expense. You could have used that alien knowledge to get rich, or to take advantage of folks who didn't know what they were dealing with. Instead, you've been a good neighbor, a fair partner, and probably the best ranch hand I've ever worked with. Whatever else you might be, Marcus, you're also my friend, and that counts for a lot more than where you came from." The emotional impact of Tom's acceptance hit Marcus with unexpected force, triggering responses that his species had evolved beyond eons ago, but which his long exposure to human society had somehow reawakened. For the first time in centuries, Marcus experienced what humans called gratitude, not the intellectual appreciation that his people felt toward useful information or favorable circumstances, but the deep, personal recognition of kindness freely given and loyalty undeserved but steadfastly maintained. But even as Marcus felt the profound relief of no longer having to maintain his deception with the one human who mattered most to him, his enhanced senses detected new complications approaching. The conversation that had seemed to resolve one crisis was about to trigger another, far more dangerous situation. Through the open window came the sound of horses approaching at speed, their hoofbeats carrying the distinctive rhythm of riders pushing their mounts hard across difficult terrain. Marcus's alien hearing identified at least 6 horses, probably more, and his enhanced perception caught the metallic signatures of multiple weapons and the electromagnetic patterns associated with human emotional states elevated by fear, anger, and desperate purpose. Tom heard them too, his experienced ear reading the same signs of approaching trouble that Marcus's alien senses had detected. But where Marcus understood the writer's approach in terms of tactical possibilities and threat assessments, Tom interpreted it through the lens of frontier experience and human social dynamics. "That'll be my brother Jake and some of the boys from town," Tom said, moving toward the window with quick, economical steps. "I sent word to him yesterday, told him about my suspicions, and asked him to bring some reliable men in case things went badly when I confronted you." Marcus felt the cold clarity of impending crisis settle over his consciousness as he realized the full implications of Tom's revelation. The conversation that had seemed to end with acceptance and understanding had actually been the opening gambit in a much larger confrontation. Tom's discovery of his alien nature had not been kept secret, but had been shared with others, creating a situation that could escalate far beyond anything Marcus could control through conversation or personal relationships. The writers were closer now, close enough for Marcus to identify individual voices and emotional states. Jake Harrison shared his brother's practical intelligence but lacked Tom's capacity for accepting the extraordinary. The men with him were frontier veterans who had survived decades of dealing with threats by eliminating them quickly and thoroughly. They were coming prepared for a fight, and Marcus understood that his alien nature would be seen not as an interesting revelation, but as a deadly threat to everything they held sacred. Tom must have seen something in Marcus's expression that revealed the depth of his concern, because his own demeanor shifted from accepting friend to protective ally with startling speed. "Now hold on there, Marcus. Jake and the boys might be a little worked up, but they're good men. Once I explain that you're not here to cause trouble, they'll settle down and listen to reason." Marcus appreciated Tom's optimism, but his experience with human group psychology suggested a less favorable outcome. Individual humans could sometimes accept extraordinary revelations with remarkable adaptability, but groups of humans tended to react to perceived threats with the kind of coordinated aggression that had made their species so successful at survival and expansion. The approaching riders would not be coming to have a conversation. They would be coming to eliminate what they saw as a threat to their community and their way of life. The sound of boots on the porch steps ended any possibility of further discussion. Jake Harrison's voice, raised to carry through the door, confirmed Marcus's assessment of the situation. "Tom, you in there? You and that thing need to come out here now. Hands where we can see them. We've got the place surrounded and we're not interested in talking this out." Marcus looked at Tom with the calm resignation of a being who had faced similar crises on dozens of worlds and understood that some situations could not be resolved through diplomacy or good intentions. "Your brother doesn't sound like he's in a listening mood, Tom, and I'm guessing that the men with him are more interested in solving problems than understanding them." Tom's expression showed the conflict between loyalty to his brother and friendship with Marcus, but his response revealed which relationship had deeper roots. "Jake's a good man, but he's got a hot temper, and he doesn't like surprises. Give me a chance to talk to him, explain things proper. He'll listen to me, and once he understands that you're not a threat, we can work this out." But Marcus had already begun calculating angles, distances, and tactical possibilities with the cold precision that had kept him alive through conflicts spanning multiple star systems. The men outside were positioned to cover all exits from the house. Their weapons were loaded and ready, and their emotional states indicated that they had already decided on a course of action that did not include allowing either Tom or Marcus to leave the building alive. What they didn't understand, what no human could fully comprehend without direct experience, was that they were not dealing with an ordinary threat that could be handled through conventional frontier tactics. Marcus had spent centuries learning to appear human, but beneath that carefully constructed facade was a being whose capabilities operated according to principles that human science would not discover for another century. The first demonstration of those capabilities came when Jake Harrison grew tired of waiting for a response and kicked in the front door with the kind of violent directness that characterized his approach to most problems. He entered the house with his rifle raised and ready, expecting to find either compliance or the beginning of a gunfight that would be resolved through superior numbers and firepower. Instead, he found Marcus Kane standing calmly in the center of the kitchen, his hands at his sides and his pale blue eyes reflecting light in patterns that no human eyes had ever displayed. When Marcus spoke, his voice carried harmonics that seemed to resonate through the wooden walls of the house and the bones of every man present. "Good evening, Jake," Marcus said, his tone conversational despite the weapons pointed at him. "Tom tells me you have some concerns about my presence in your community. I'd like to discuss those concerns with you if you're willing to listen." Jake's response was immediate and predictable. He raised his rifle and fired at point-blank range. The .44 caliber bullet aimed directly at Marcus's chest with enough force to drop any normal man instantly. But Marcus was not a normal man, and what happened next would be talked about in frontier saloons for decades to come, though few would ever believe the full truth of what those witnesses had seen. The bullet struck Marcus squarely in the chest and simply stopped, as if it had hit a wall of invisible steel rather than human flesh. It hung in the air for a moment, spinning slowly, then dropped to the wooden floor with a metallic ring that seemed to echo far longer than physics should have allowed. The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of Jake Harrison's rifle hitting the floor as his nerveless fingers released their grip. Behind him, the other members of his impromptu posse began backing toward the door with the instinctive recognition that they were facing something so far outside their experience that their normal responses were not merely inadequate, but potentially suicidal. Marcus looked down at the flattened bullet at his feet, then raised his eyes to meet Jake's terrified gaze. "As I was saying," he continued in the same conversational tone, "I'd like to discuss your concerns, but perhaps we could do so without the firearms since they seem to be making everyone nervous." What followed was the most unusual peace negotiation in the history of the American frontier, conducted between a terrified group of humans and an alien being who possessed the power to destroy them all, but preferred to talk things through like civilized beings. Tom Harrison found himself serving as translator and mediator, helping his brother and the other men understand that their bullets were useless, while convincing Marcus that their hostility stemmed from fear rather than malice. The conversation that gradually developed revealed the complexity of the situation that Marcus's exposure had created. Word of Tom's discovery had spread throughout the community, creating panic and uncertainty that threatened to destabilize the entire region. Rumors were flying about alien invasions, government conspiracies, and supernatural threats that required immediate and violent response. But as the night wore on and Marcus patiently answered their questions, explaining his mission and his long residence among them, the mood slowly shifted from terrified hostility to cautious curiosity. The men who had come prepared to eliminate an alien threat found themselves learning about technologies and perspectives that expanded their understanding of the universe in ways they had never imagined. Jake Harrison, once he recovered from the shock of watching a bullet bounce off Marcus's chest, proved to be nearly as adaptable as his brother. His questions were practical and direct. How long had Marcus been living among them? Were there others like him? What did his people want from humans? Did his presence put the community in danger? Marcus's answers were as honest as security protocols would allow. He had been on Earth for nearly 3 decades, most of that time spent in the American West, studying the unique social dynamics of frontier communities. There were others of his kind scattered throughout the world, but their numbers were small and their mission was observation rather than interference. His people wanted nothing from humans except the opportunity to study and understand their development, and his presence actually provided a degree of protection against threats that humans were not yet equipped to handle on their own. The revelation that sparked the most intense discussion was Marcus's explanation of why he had chosen to remain in their community for so long. His original assignment had called for periodic relocation to avoid the kind of long-term relationships that might compromise his objectivity. But his friendship with Tom, his integration into the local community, and his growing appreciation for human courage and resilience had made him reluctant to move on as planned. This admission resonated with men who understood the value of loyalty, friendship, and community bonds. The alien being who had seemed so threatening just hours earlier began to appear more like a neighbor who happened to have unusual origins and capabilities. His long residence among them, his contributions to community life, and his obvious affection for the people he had lived among gradually overcame their initial fear and suspicion. By dawn, the crisis that had threatened to tear apart both Marcus's carefully constructed life and the community he had come to love had evolved into something unprecedented in the history of either species, a formal agreement between a human community and an alien observer that acknowledged the truth while protecting the interests of both sides. The agreement was simple in its broad outlines, but complex in its implications. Marcus would continue to live among them as he always had, but without the need to conceal his true nature from his closest friends and neighbors. In exchange, the community would keep his secret from outsiders, protecting both themselves and him from the complications that wider exposure would inevitably bring. More importantly, Marcus would serve as an unofficial guardian and advisor, using his advanced knowledge and capabilities to help the community deal with threats and challenges that normal human resources couldn't handle. He would remain their neighbor and friend, but also their protector against dangers that existed beyond human understanding. The months that followed proved that cooperation between species could work when it was based on mutual respect, trust, and genuine affection. Marcus's open acknowledgement of his alien nature paradoxically strengthened his relationships with the humans around him, allowing for a level of honesty and understanding that his years of deception had never provided. The community prospered under his subtle protection, avoiding disasters that struck other settlements and benefiting from innovations that Marcus introduced carefully and gradually. His technology helped improve crop yields. His weather predictions prevented losses from storms and droughts, and his medical knowledge saved lives that would otherwise have been lost to frontier hazards. But perhaps most importantly, the successful integration of an alien being into human society provided a model for the kind of interspecies cooperation that would eventually allow humanity to take its place among the galactic community. The lessons learned in that small Montana Territory community would influence contact protocols for generations, proving that acceptance and understanding were possible when different species approached each other with good faith and mutual respect. Years later, as Tom Harrison sat on his porch watching Marcus work with the younger generation of ranchers, he often reflected on the night when he had picked up a shotgun and confronted his alien neighbor. The weapon that had seemed so necessary at the time now seemed almost comical in its inadequacy, not because of Marcus's invulnerability, but because the real resolution had come through conversation, understanding, and the recognition that differences in origin were less important than similarities in character. The cowboy alien who had realized he was in trouble when he saw a human reach for a shotgun had discovered something more valuable than security. He had found a home where he could be accepted for what he truly was, rather than what he pretended to be. And the humans who had been prepared to fight an alien threat had learned that the universe was far larger and more welcoming than they had ever imagined, filled with beings who could become friends and allies when approached with courage and open minds. The shotgun still hung above Tom's fireplace, but it had become more of a symbol than a weapon, a reminder of the night when fear had almost destroyed something precious, but understanding and friendship had prevailed instead. In the end, the trouble that Marcus had feared had become the beginning of the most rewarding relationship of his long life, proving that sometimes the greatest dangers could become the greatest opportunities when faced with wisdom, courage, and the willingness to see beyond surface differences to the deeper truths that connected all conscious beings.